Okay, so are we ready to start? Let's get going. So first of all, I put forward when we did meet 2 weeks ago, I mentioned that there were actually, this is a wonderful story. The stories we are doing now, chapters 4 and 5. Chapter 4 is the story. Chapter 5 is Deborah's song of victory, a very long poem that is not just praising and excitement over the victory, but it also fills in details of the story that we don't know from chapter 4. So we're kind of going back and forth a little bit as we study chapter 4, because we're going to be filling in a bit of the details in chapter 5. But anyway, what I mentioned, though, is that, first of all, Deborah, of course, is the main heroine of this story, but there's actually 3 women that are not necessarily heroines, but 3 women that we will be encountering. I would say 2 are heroines and 1 is not. Did any of you figure out who are the 3 women? Judy, go. Unmute yourself, Judy. Who are the 3 women?
We have Yael in chapter 4, verses 17 to 22, the wife of Heber the Kenini.
Right.
Then you have Sisera's mother in chapter 5, verse 28.
Excellent. That's the 3rd woman.
Well done.
No, but I got another one too. And what about 5:29? The wisest of her ladies answers her. Is that another woman?
Nah, because that's all part of the mother of Sisera. That's
Is it
just
still
the chorus.
Sisera?
That's just the chorus, you know.
Okay,
but yes,
sorry.
The 3 women are Deborah, Yael, and Sisera's mother. Okay, and I think it's very interesting because really these women serve as in many ways the pillars of the story. The story opens with Deborah, and she's clearly the heroine. She's the one that initiates the war. She brings the word from God. She encourages Barak. She basically shames him into going out to war, you know. And keep in mind that the woman versus the man is a very important tension that goes on here. And if we can see in verse 6, Deborah sends to Barak, okay? She summons him. Now, normally, if there's a need for battle, it is the general that's going to initiate. And she's not even a king. She's not a queen, or she's not, you know, she's just a judge. Ostensibly a very local kind of ruler who's much more involved in solving disputes between individuals than she is having a national political cause. Okay. So, but she's the one who summons. And what does she say? She says, she summoned Barak and said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, is commanded, go march up to Mount Tabor and take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun. And I will draw Sisera, Jabin's army commander, with his chariots and his troops toward you up to the Vadi Kishon, and I will deliver him into your hands. Okay, now she's basically now quoting God, right? But Barak said to her, if you will go with me, I will go. If not, I will not go. What kind of sissy general is this? Okay, this is such an amazing thing that it is the woman who not only brings the word of God to Barak and summons him to war, but basically she becomes the strength. She becomes the one who says, okay, I'm giving you the strength, I'm giving you the encouragement. And without her, the general's not willing to go to war. So that puts her in a very interesting position. And Yael, as we'll see later, is just a woman who's at home in her tent. Okay. And that's very consistent. Okay. Deborah is an unusual woman. We learn, and again, we're going to read these verses, but I just kind of giving an overview that we'll go in and see it more specifically in the chapters and verses themselves. But Deborah, we already meet Deborah in verse 4 as a prophetess and as someone who judges. Okay, so she's already a leader, which makes her very unusual. In fact, she's the only woman judge. Okay, all the other leaders that we're going to encounter in the book of Judges are men. She's unusual, so that already puts her in a different position. Yael is introduced to us as a wife of someone who's living in a tent, who is not a leader, and yet she takes an amazing initiative that indeed makes a huge difference in the way the outcome of the battle and the conflict between Israel and these Canaanites. And then, of course, there's the third woman who we only learn about at the very end of chapter 5. She is somebody that Deborah talks about in the course of her, kind of gloating of the victory. Okay, she paints an enormous picture, a wonderful picture of Sisera's mother waiting at the window, waiting for her son, the great general, to come. And you have this picture of the mother of who should be the hero and the women waiting with her, and they're expecting to get tremendous, the son is going to march at the head of a victorious army, and they're going to laud his victories, and he's going to distribute all the spoils, and everything is going to be wonderful. And of course, what we have instead is that she ends up having lost her son because it's Yael who has murdered him. Okay, so she becomes this tragic figure in a way of the mother waiting for the son who never comes home, and we can contrast her to the heroines of the story, who are Deborah and Yael, in very different ways. So anyway, that's just an overview, but we're going to see them later on. So let's go now and start reading in the verses and see what we can learn about this story. Chapter 4. The Israelites again did what was offensive to the Lord, Ehud now being dead. Okay, now we learned before, we had a whole story of Ehud, son of Gera. He was a very successful judge, and we learned a lot about how he manages to defeat, it's this wonderful plan, and how he defeats the king Eglon, and we know he's very, very successful. And then after he dies, we have we learn in chapter 30 of the previous, verse 30 of the previous chapter, that after Ehud, we have an 80-year period of peace. So Ehud is perceived as a particularly successful judge or leader. And then we have in verse 31 a very short verse about Shamgar, and it just says he slew 600 Philistines. So we know here that we don't know anything about him bringing a particular period of peace. And there are those who think that Shamgar actually was living during the same time frame as Ehud. And this is just a mention of a particular victory that was significant because he did slew 600 Philistines. And of course, the presence of Philistines is going to be particularly significant as we move on. But what chapter 4 begins with is Ehud is dead, which strengthens the idea that Shamgar himself does not mark a period, that it's Ehud that marks the entire period, because the next period, when we talk about Deborah, is marked by the death of Ehud, not by the death of Shamgar. Okay. And the Lord surrendered them to King Yavin, or Yabin, as it's written in English, of Canaan, who resigned in Chatzor. His army commander was Sisera, whose base was Charoshet Goyim. The Israelites cried out to the Lord, for he had 900 iron chariots, and he had oppressed Israel ruthlessly for 20 years. Okay, now we have met in the past, we've met even in Joshua, a situation of in parts of Samaria where the Israelites were hesitant and not necessarily successful in routing some of the Canaanites because they had chariots. Okay, and here again we have the very fact of iron chariots as a tremendous threat to the Israelites. The Israelites don't have chariots. Okay, they don't at all, certainly not in this period. We don't see chariots among the Israelites until we get to the kings later on. So this is certainly threatening for them. One of the things I think I started mentioning last week, who is this Yavin, the king of Canaan? Because we learned already under Joshua that he was killed, that he was the king of Chatzor. Chatzor was captured, the king was killed under Joshua, and yet suddenly he shows up again. Well, there is an explanation, which I think makes a lot of sense, that the name Yavin is not necessarily a private name, but the name that was taken by whoever were the kings of Chatzor. And that there was a Yavin, like Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the name of everyone who was a king of Egypt through a very long period of time. And therefore, what happens is during Joshua's time, Chatzor is captured, it is destroyed, and Yavin is killed. But sometime later, okay, there is a descendant of Yavin who then declares himself king of Chatzor. Now, there's no question this king of Chatzor does not have the power or the strength or the arms or whatever that his predecessor had. When the nation of Israel comes in under Joshua, Chatzor is a huge fortified city, and the defeat of Chatzor is significant. The understanding that what is going on at this period of time, you'll recall, we talked about the fact that the nation of Israel completed the conquest of the entire area, but unfortunately had left pockets where there were still Canaanites, where they did not succeed in getting rid of the Canaanites. So the understanding is that in Chatzor, there would have been a renewed presence of Canaanites, and this would have been a city that for whatever reason, the Israelites did not succeed in settling and replacing all the people that had lived there before, so that it had the chance to come to life again. And this is the fellow that we're dealing with now. Okay, so now, who is the one that has all the chariots? It is not Yavin, and this is very important to understand. It is not Yavin the Canaanite, it is Sisera, okay? Sisera is the general, okay? Yavin is a king, but Yavin is a weak king, and Yavin is powerless to do anything. He doesn't have an army of his own. His general is Sisera. Now, who is Sisera? And this perhaps is one of the most interesting things, and it's something that I think is just amazing, what I'm going to tell you now. There was an archaeologist who died a couple years ago, very well-known archaeologist in Israel from the University of Haifa, and his name was Adam Zartel. And some of you may recognize the name because he is the archaeologist who found Joshua's altar on Mount Ebal. And that was quite an amazing discovery, of course, as you can well imagine. In fact, it was a very recent discovery of a small writing on some kind of a stone tablet or whatever that talks about the blessings and the curses, and it kind of, fortifies the idea that this indeed is Mount Ebal. But we're not talking about Mount Ebal today. That we did already when we did Joshua. But the same Adam Zartel wrote another book called The Secret of Sisera as a result of a dig that he conducted in a place called El Ahwat. Okay, now I'm going to put up the map. I want to make sure I can do this right because I sometimes, here we go, the share screen. 1 second. Okay, this is a map that we constantly use. Do you see the map? Wait. Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm trying to.
Can you enlarge it a little bit? That's all.
What?
Can you enlarge it a little bit?
Is that better?
Excellent. Thank
okay,
you.
now what I'm trying to do is go back to this. No, that's not what I want. So I'm trying to go back to, oh, here we go. Ah, I did something. No, because I want to be able to see. Yes, here we go. Okay, so this is the map, and Charoshet Hagoyim, which we learned about here. If you let me just move this down a little bit. Okay. Why do you people keep disappearing from me? It's like, oh, there you go. Okay, so we learned that Sisera is living in Charoshet Hagoyim. Now, Charoshet Hagoyim is not marked on this map, but it is thought to be. Well, I'll tell you what. There was a archaeological site that Adam Zartel dug, and it's located right here. Okay, you see Megiddo, you see Ta'anach, you see Dor over here, and it's in between there. It's right here. Okay, You see my cursor? You see where my cursor is? Okay, good. This is where it is. Now, this is what I find so amazing. Now, if you look at the name Sisera, it's a very strange name. And scholars will say this is not it's certainly not an Israelite name. It's not a Canaanite name. It's a very strange name. Who is this fellow? So Adam Zartel was doing a dig there at El Akhwat, and he noticed that it was an extremely strange place. First of all, there was pottery that, archaeologists very often learn a lot from pottery. Pottery that was there was not at all similar to the pottery they found in other places in the land of Israel from any of the periods of time, okay? And when they dated the pottery, it did not fit with other pottery they found in other places at the same time. Also, the structure. There's a unique structure there made of smallish stones, okay, built up round a circular kind of main building and all kinds of hallways, very different kind of structure from anything they had ever seen before. I don't know exactly how he figured it out, but I think someone referred him to somebody from Sardinia, okay? He goes to Sardinia and he discovers that there is a type of structure in Sardinia, ancient structure, that are referred to as nurag, a nurag. It's a kind of building, N-U-R-A-G, a nurag, or something like that. Nuraji, nurag, something like that. It's a kind of a building structure, ancient structure, that they have found in many places in Sardinia. And when he went to Sardinia and he looked at the structure and he said, this is so similar to the structure that I found in El Akhwat here in Israel. In addition, when he compared the pottery that he found in El Akhwat, he discovered that it was very similar to pottery found for the same time period in Sardinia. As a result of that and other things, one more thing. Very near where one of these nuragim are in Sardinia, there is a town to this day called Sasra. And therefore, he put forth this theory, and he backed it up in many other ways as well. I'm just mentioning some of them, that indeed Sisera comes from Sardinia. He comes from Sardinia. His name makes sense. There's this place in Sardinia that is called Sasra. A name fits in with Sardinia. Now, Sardinia is part of Greece. It's one of the Greek islands, okay? What does this all mean? Now let's zoom back for a second and give a greater context. We just mentioned at the end of chapter 3 that we met the Philistines for the first time. Who are the Philistines? The Philistines are people that are not native to Israel. They are not Canaanites, and they're certainly not Israelites. The name Philistine in Hebrew is Plishtim. And Plishtim comes from the root word Palesh, which means invade. Philistines are invaders, and they came from the sea. And indeed, there is a group of people that, as a result of all kinds of archaeological discoveries in North Africa, and particularly in Israel and in the Greek islands, okay, and also documents that were discovered in Egypt, the archaeologists and historians paint the following picture. There were a group of people that were known as the nations of the sea. The nations of the sea, different tribes that originated in the Greek islands. And for a number of reasons, first of all, for a while, they were actually in Egypt. They functioned as mercenaries in Egypt, and at one point actually tried to overthrow one of the Egyptian kings, and at that point were expelled from Egypt, and were looking for other places to go. These became mercenaries, and they were available to whoever were interested in hiring their services. And there were at least three different tribes of these nations of the sea who ended up here in the land of Israel. One was the Philistines, which are here, as you can see on the map. Another was a group called the Sakal, which were located about here. Do you see where I'm moving my Okay, you see Megiddo, around Megiddo, Tanakh, forget what I said. The Sakal group, you see where it says door, they were along the coast in this area. So along the coast in the south and coming inland were the Philistines in the south near Gaza, up by Dor, which was another group called the Sakal. And next to the Sakal in this area, Megiddo and Tanakh, was another group called the Shardona. Okay, now the Shardona given, and we have the name Shardona in these original documents that they found in Egypt. The Shardona is very similar in name to the name Sardinia. So the theory goes that there were these Shardona, one of these invading mercenary tribes that come in, originating from the Greek islands, come into the land of Israel and settle. Now we'll remember that most of the coastal plain was occupied by Philistines or similar. Now don't forget, they may be called similar Philistines and Sakal and Shardona, but they're all related. They all have similar backgrounds, similar cultures, okay? They're just different tribes. So we know that this whole area along the coast was an area that the nation of Israel did not succeed in conquering in a serious way. And we're going to have trouble from these people throughout the book of Judges, okay? So what Adam Zartal then posited was as follows. I think it's a brilliant analysis. He said that this El Ahwat, which is located just about here, that is the original Chorashat HaGoyim. That is the place where Sisera was from. That Sisera himself was a Sardinian. He, with his tribe as a mercenary tribe, comes here, settles in this area, sets up a city that mimics Sardinian culture of that time, building structures in the same way, pottery that they brought with them and continue to produce here, but in the same type of pottery, okay? And it fits 100% with what we have just said now about Yavin. Yavin himself is not a powerful king. He is in a little bubble, a Canaanite bubble, surrounded by Israelites. He, though, wants to take back his land. He wants to defeat the Israelites, and he hires or he teams up with Sisera, who is over here. Sisera, the guy with the big army, the guy with the big chariots, and he's saying, I need your help. And they band together to defeat the Israelites, at least in this area. Okay, so this tells us something about who it is, where's Chorashat HaGoyim, and who it is that Sisera is. And I think the fact that Sisera is not local, is not Canaanite, also tells us something about the nature of the story. Okay, so that's what we know about Sisera. Let's move on. Verse 4. Deborah, now here, the English, I'm going to avoid the English for now, and I'm going to literally translate this first verse. Deborah, a woman prophetess, a woman of Lapidot, okay? She judged Israel during that time. Now, why do I say, first of all, it's clear that the beginning says that Deborah was a prophetess, a woman who's a prophetess. Okay, Deborah's a prophetess. We know that. What does woman of Lapidot mean? Now, some translations say that her husband's name was Lapidot, and she is the wife of Lapidot. Some commentaries, however, say no, she is a woman of Lapidot. Lapidot is not her husband's name. Lapidot says something about what she did or who she was. Now, lapid is either a torch or a wick. Okay, it has something to do with candles. Okay, it can be. So some of the commentaries said she was a woman who made candles. It was her profession. Okay, she was a woman who made candles, and in fact, one of the commentaries say that she made candles for the temple. All right, now candles are not candles as we think of it. It's more like wick with oil. They didn't use stick candles and solid wax in those years. Okay, so she would have prepared wicks, or perhaps wicks in a little oil. If you've seen those little oil, what's it called? Oil jars. The little that they would use as candles, those things. So she made those, or she prepared them for the temple. Well, now this is not the temple, this is for the tabernacle. Okay, so that gives her extra credit. But I like the fact that, and maybe this is my feminism talking. And by the way, these commentaries who are saying that it's not her husband's name, but it talks about her, are not commentaries from the feminist movement. They're commentaries from 1,000 years ago. Okay, but I think it makes sense with the story. You have a woman who was such a powerful woman in her own right. Her husband's name is completely irrelevant. It makes a lot more sense that Lapidot describes something about her than gives you the name of her husband. But anyway, you can read it any way you want. And she judged Israel. And here we go, verse 5. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites would come to her for decisions. So until this point in time, when we meet the various judges, the judges that we've met before don't seem to have real judge-like jobs. Okay, they are more leaders, and we talked about how the word judge can also be interpreted as a leader, and they're not a king, they're more local leader, but clearly their role is more a political / military role. But here we learn that Deborah herself was actually a judge. People came to her to solve their disputes, okay, which I think is also very, very interesting. So what do we know about her? She has a profession. She makes candles, or however you want to call that. She is a prophetess, so we know that she's a holy woman and a woman that God has selected to bring his messages to the nation. And we learned that she's a judge. And she's a judge in this sense, not that she was, she put herself up and says, I'm a judge and I went to law school and I passed the bar, but that she becomes a judge because people naturally seek her judgments. They seek her wisdom in solving disputes. So she is, in many cases, then not as much of a legal scholar as a natural leader, because when people have problems, they come to her and she solves their problems. Okay, verse 6. We saw this already before, that she summons Barak because God has given her the word. And she says to him, note this, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun. So look at our map again. We have Naphtali over here, Zebulun is here. And she actually summons Barak, who lives in Kadesh, in Kadesh, in Naphtali. So you see here, it says Kadesh, that's where Barak lives. He's living up there in the Golan, in the Galilee. He lives today very in those mountains, let's say, that are just above Kiryat Shmona. If anybody, you know where that is. It's, we vacation in that area all the time in the summer. It's a beautiful, beautiful area. This is where he lives. And he's of the tribe of Naphtali, so she calls him. And the most natural thing, of course, that he's going to come down, he's going to also bring Zebulun, which is right near here. And she says, gather in Tabor. Okay, so Tabor is right here. Tabor is basically in this triangle where Naphtali, Zebulun, and Issachar meet. It's interesting, she doesn't say bring Issachar as well, but we do learn later on that Issachar participates as well. Maybe Issachar was not known for the great military prowess, but they do participate. And then she already gives them, in God's instructions, what the strategy is supposed to be. They are supposed to lure Sisera's army into the Kishon River. Now, the Kishon River goes from Haifa, and you see this little, it kind of like looks like a border here, but this little blue line over here coming from this over here is today the Bay of Haifa, coming down towards here, right? And it comes down as far as here where it meets Zebulun and Issachar, and is just south of Mount Tabor. So what the instruction is, gather your troops in Mount Tabor, and then from Mount Tabor, go out and lure them into this valley, into the Kishon River. Now, this is a Nachal. A Nachal in Israel, as many of you I'm sure know, is not necessarily a river. It is only a river during the rainy season, and only if it's a particularly good rainy season. Most of the year, it is dry. And this is a very significant fact when we want to understand what happens to this battle, because clearly, if you have a full river, you're not going to succeed in luring anybody into a river. But if it's a dry valley, that is an easy passageway from west to east. And when you're surrounded by mountains, luring them into the Kishon to go and meet them up in Tabor, or as they come down from Tabor, makes a lot of sense. It is, if they would come down towards Charoshet HaGoyim, the Charoshet HaGoyim is over here. If they would come down from Mount Tabor towards Charoshet HaGoyim, say till about here, the way for Sisera to meet that army would be to go north to the Nachal, to the Kishon river bed, and to meet them as they come from Mount Tabor. So that made a lot of sense. And then, of course, we read before that he says, Barak says to Deborah, I'll only go if you go. And what is her answer? She really puts him in his pocket, puts him in his place. She says in verse 9, very well, I will go with you, she answered. However, there will be no glory for you in the course you are taking, for then the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. Now, it's clear that she is referring to herself, okay? Because she's the one who has prodded Barak, and Barak is relying on her, and so she's basically saying, sure, I'll come with you, but you need to understand, I'm going to get credit that it was a woman, okay? But we know, and of course, she's speaking in a way as a prophetess, but a prophetess doesn't necessarily understand the significance of everything they say. So here in this case, she's saying Sisera will be felled by a woman, when in fact the woman who kills Sisera is Yael. Okay, Yael, not Deborah. Anyway, so he says to her, so Deborah went with Barak. No, that was verse 9. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. Barak then mustered Zebulun and Naphtali at Kadesh. 10,000 men marched up after him, and Deborah also went with him. Okay, so they gather up in Kadesh because that's where he is, and they muster the troops, and they're going to come down to Mount Tabor. Well, that's as far as we've gone today. I'm afraid I think we're going to take more than a total of 2 weeks on this. We'll see, but we certainly have one more class to go through this, and we're going to also do the rest, both 4 and 5 together, because it's all part of one story. But unfortunately, we have lost our time for today. We've run out of time. But anyone, please, if you have any comments, now's the time to mention. Unmute yourselves and say something. Yes.
Could you how do you spell Zata? Is it Zaata or Agam Zata?
What is that? Where do you see that?
The archaeologist.
Oh, Zartal, Zartal.
Oh, thanks.
I think his book was translated into English, this one, Sisera's Secret. But if you put it in Google, I'm sure you'll find articles in English about what he discovered. But it's in Hebrew as well, obviously. Yeah, he wrote it in Hebrew. Yeah, okay, he fine. Wrote it in Hebrew, but I'm pretty sure there's articles in English about it as well. Yeah. Thank you, Sondra, for the background to Sisera. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, really interesting. Thank you, Derek. Yeah. Thank you, Derek. I have to add one more thing. A couple of years ago, right before COVID, Ed's company every few years takes the employees on a few day visit to some place in Europe or whatever. And we had a trip to Sardinia. And as soon as I heard we were going to Sardinia, I said, oh my gosh, I've got to go and see these structures. And so we went, and we, with another friend of mine who's here, a neighbor, also her husband works in the same place. We rented a car and we went out. We saw that sign that says Sasra, and we went to a Nurag, okay? And we saw it, and it was just unbelievable, okay? And I felt, it was so neat because I felt I'm standing here and I'm saying, here, oh my gosh, there's a connection between this place in Sardinia and the Bible. It was such an amazing experience. We're used to seeing connections with the Bible in Israel, but we're not used to seeing them in Greece. So, and on Sardinia, and, it was very funny. So we had a guide who took us around. So I asked him if he had heard of this theory. Yes, he had. Of course, not everybody agrees with that theory, but he had. And I told him, well, we're from Israel, and we have, seen that, we're from where that other place is. And it would be.
Sondra,
yes.
A few years ago, I I wrote a little article about these chapters, and I called it "This Bee Has a Stinger."
Oh,
that's very good.
that's great. Because Deborah, of course, means
It's
bee.
B, yeah.
Yes.
Her name,
So,
Deborah, means bee. Yeah.
because working from English, I took the name Lapidoth as the name of her husband, but in looking into the meaning of the word and tracing it back, and by extension came up with the idea of enlightened. And
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Yeah. 'Cause it
so
is light. Yeah.
so as a man, if his name had that meaning of being enlightened, that is, he was enlightened to the point where his wife was allowed to do whatever God called her
Oh, that's
to do.
interesting. That's lovely. That is a
But
lovely way of looking
I'm
at it.
thinking also that if you take it as you explained it today, not as a name, but as describing her, if again, by extension, it could not mean that she, being enlightened, had such wisdom that it enabled her to, even as a woman, to be a judge in Israel.
But
Yeah,
wouldn't
that's right.
I mean, surely it's a plural noun anyway.
It's
So-
yeah,
so
lucky
feminine
dogs.
plu-
So
it's
it's like
feminine plural.
torches or wicks,
Yeah.
it's, yeah, definitely. Now, someone I see in the chat asked, what's the connection between that name and the political party? So the Yair Lapid is a name of a fellow. He's the head of a political party. It's not the name of the political party. It's his name, and it's Lapid, and it's exactly the same source, which means light or torch. And it's a name that his father actually took on. They had a different name coming from Eastern Europe, and when he came to Israel, he took a name that was similar, and he liked the name. So that, it's a name that people take on because lapid, torch, or light, or wick, it has a very positive connotation. It's a name that people would like to take on. Any other questions or comments about the teaching today? Yes, Tom.
Following on from Diane's question, I looked up this word in the Hebrew, wife, and it actually says isha, which is a Hebrew
It's
word
eshet.
there, which
Eshet,
could
like
be
a
Eshet,
woman, it
which
could
is
mean
woman
wife.
of, okay?
Yes.
But it could be a woman of the law, a woman, in other words, a woman doesn't necessarily mean wife, although it also means wife.
No, it
So
doesn't.
it can be used to describe her profession. It could be used to describe a characteristic of her, or it could be used to describe the fact that this is her husband. It could, the words in Hebrew can be interpreted either way.
It's smichut.
Lapidot, eshet lapidot.
Yeah, that would be smichut, wouldn't it? I mean,
Right,
putting it together.
exactly. Eshet is isha shel. In other words, it's the woman of. It's eshet as opposed to isha. Isha is woman. Eshet gives it a connectivity to another word. Okay, and then lapidot is like what we said, light or torch, wick, whatever. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Okay,
you very
bye-bye.
much. Thank you.
Be well.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below, as well as on the notification bell, and that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.